Hey guys, Wade Willis here for my playthrough of Umineko, Chapter 1, and this is my 14th part to this. It's getting real intense here with the family, the survivors of the family. We had Ava and Hideyoshi. They were accusing Natsui of making the grandfather go missing, their father. Making him go missing, and like they had this scheme with a receipt. It was just really silly. And then Natsui was not taking it well, had her shotgun out. It looked like she was going to shoot them, which I would have not been upset about because Ava is the most sketch person to me. And then Battler came in swinging and was like, hey, like you guys are as suspicious as anyone. Like, you were the last people to see the people who were murdered going through like this. And that's kind of where we're at right now. So, Battler came in and kind of put Ava and Hideyoshi, like, in their place. Like, if you're in a glass house, you shouldn't be throwing stones. So, I have no idea how much further I have left in this chapter. I would think I'm almost done. I mean, I've been going at this for a while. So, but I guess we'll see. And yeah, guys, don't forget to like the video and subscribe. Oh, I forgot that Jessica's like about to freaking die. That's like the most important part. Okay, yeah, shit's hitting the fan with Jessica. Dr. Nancho pulled a bronchodilator inhaler from his own bag, which was lying on the sofa, and handed it to Jessica. Come to think of it, 6 years ago, didn't Jessica break into some violent coughing fits and have to use that? However, 6 years ago, I never saw Jessica look like she was in this much pain.
兄貴、ジェシカってこんなに喘息ひどかったっけ？ここ数年でだいぶ悪くなったんだよ。大丈夫な時はいいんだけどね。突然発作が来ると咳が止まらなくなるんだよ。
Angel's coughing up a lung over here. Gross.
お嬢様、お薬です。さあ。
Taking the inhaler from Kaneko, Jessica used it with a practiced hand. It looked like her throat would still itch for a while, but she had it under control.
大丈夫かよ、ジェシカ。
Ugh.
びっくりしたぜ。
大したことねえよ。心配すんじゃねえぜ。
Beads of sweat covered Jessica's whole body, and she couldn't hide her rough breathing, but it looked like her sudden attack had calmed down for now. The disturbance had made a dangerous atmosphere up until now seemed slightly unfocused. But that's fine. That kind of battle of mutual suspicion is completely unnecessary. When you think about it, finding alibis for each other and looking for the culprit is probably meaningless. After all, we're just powerless, ordinary people. And when the police come tomorrow, they'll definitely employ cutting-edge techniques and investigate the case thoroughly, solving all the riddles and arresting the culprit. Yeah, except this is before like CSI, yo.
確かにバトラ君の言う通りかしら。夏日姉さんが疑わしいように、私たちも疑わしさを拭えていない。それを今議論し合うのは確かに不毛ね。
Oh, is it now?
明日、警察に全てを任せれば済むだけの話よ。
Oh my god, I freaking...
でも、バトラ君だって知りたいんじゃないの？犯人を。大切な人を失った痛みを思い知らせてやるために、1秒でも早く知りたいんじゃない？
それは否定しないです。これだけの上等を決めてくれやがった野郎を。たとえでも、だからといって、18人の中の誰かを疑いたくはない。
Fair.
さっきはああ言ったが、俺は、エヴァおばさんだって疑いたくない。俺にとってのエヴァおばさんは、茶目っ気があって、いつも楽しくさせてくれる最高のおばさんだ。
Yeah, Homegirl's a menace, though.
そんなおばさんと、こ こんな罵り合いはしたくねえ。ここにいる誰だって、そんなことは望んでねえはずさ。だろ、みんな。バトラ君に同じ、意味のない罵り合いだね。多分、これだけの人数が朝から一ところにずっと集まってるから、みんなストレスが溜まってるんだよ。
I have a feeling because they say that two people who love each other are going to be split up. I feel like Ava and Hideyoshi, like, she's going to end up hooking up with someone.
でしょうな。
Probably Battler.
無理もないことです。言ってできるものではありませんが、なるべく皆さんリラックスしましょう。
Doctor's orders.
エヴァ、わしらも頭を冷やすべきとちゃうか。レシートの件は確かにお父さんの失踪を探る上で重要な手がかりになると思うで。警察が来たら話すといいやろ。
What? Why don't you guys check his room now? Huh?
そう。レシートの一件で、つい鬼の首を取ったような気持ちになっちゃったのね。確かに夏日姉さんだけを疑うのはフェアじゃないわ。私たちだって等しく疑わしい。でもね、バトラ君。レシートの話だけは本当よ。これ、忘れないでね。そしてこれがどういう意味を持つか、もう一度よく考えてみてね。
And Ava and Uncle Hideyoshi stood up. It looked like they planned on leaving the parlor.
結局私たちはこんな推理ごっこしても意味はないのよ。だってどうせ警察が全て明かしてくれるんですもの。
That's right. Even if we don't play this detective game, the typhoon will pass. And when those seagulls, those lively seagulls return to the harbor, everything will settle itself. That's right. If you think about it, this kind of crime is completely trivial. What? It will definitely be resolved, even if we do nothing. When the seagulls cry. Well, that's the name.
これ以上、夏日姉さんも私の顔を見ていたくはないでしょ。
Oh, you think?
私も同じよ。確か姉さんは昨日、ゲストハウスに帰らなくて済むようにって客室を用意してくれたのよね。あそこはバスもトイレもあるし、鍵もチェーンもかかる。横になれるベッドもあるし、主人もマリアちゃんとチャンネル争いをせずにテレビを見ることができるわ。
She has a gun again.
お好きになさるといいでしょう。でも、くれぐれも用心を。
ありがとう、姉さん。そして余計なお世話よ。姉さんはみんなの監視をよろしくね。犯人はこの中に必ずいるんだから。そして姉さんも、自分が監視をされていることをお忘れなく。
捨て台詞はそれで十分ですか？
ええ、十分よ。じゃあね、夏日姉さん。源氏さん、夕食になったら呼んでね。それまでチェーンをかけて閉じこもってるわ。
源氏、カノ、お二人を客室までお送りを。
結構よ。送り狼なんて嫌だもの。
Dang.
むしろ、私たちが部屋に行くまで誰もこの部屋を出ないでくれる方が安心よ。ジョージ行くわよ。
僕は、ここでみんなといるよ。
ジョージ、この部屋に犯人がいるのよ。そんなところにいるつもり？
この部屋を出るということは、親族の誰かを疑うのと同じことだよ。僕は、 あんな恐ろしいことができる人間が、親族にいるなんて信じない。
ジョージ！あなたからも言ってやってよ！
ジョージももう一人前の男や。そのジョージの仁義が、この部屋から出えへん言わせるなら、それも勝手やろ。好きにさせたれ。
父さん。
Aunt Ava and Uncle Hideyoshi left. The only voice that called after them was the sound of the rain. The parlor was being buried beneath a savage atmosphere. When I looked at the clock, I was surprised to find that it was already the evening. Had we really spent this much time worrying about needless things? Talking with each other and fighting with each other? Feeling bored, I started scratching my head when Maria and I made eye contact. I was a little surprised that I thought she was completely immersed in the TV.
今なら信じるぜ。手紙も殺人もすべてベアトリーチェの仕業だ。いや、むしろ頼むからそうだと名乗り出てほしいぜ。19人目の仕業ってことにさせてくれ。じゃなきゃ、俺たち18人はいつまでも互いを疑い合わなくちゃならねえ。これなら、19人目の存在を信じる方がマシさ。
Fair point, dude.
扉も窓も開けずに、じいさまを外へ連れ出すなんて。ベアトリーチェならお茶の子さいさいなんだろう。
Maria, after taking a single short breath, hung her head, then raised her face again. Oh, she's gonna be creepy, isn't she? Oh.
そうだよ。魔女の前に扉の鍵なんて何の役にも立たないんだよ。ベアトリーチェは72中の全てに精通する。33位のガープは望む相手を望む場所へ瞬時に運ぶ力を与えるし。
What?
彼女にとってどのような密室に閉じこもった人間だろうと連れ出すことは難しいことでも何でもないんだよ。
Yo, homegirl
魔
is
女は
creepy.
すげえな。頼むから。もしまだ事件を起こす気なら、絶対に俺に19人目を、いや、魔女の存在を信じさせてくれよ。
I don't know if I would ask her to do that, but
いいよ。あったら伝えておくよ。
crap. Nothing's made sense to me for a while now. Just when I want to believe that in a 19th person, I deny it. And just when I want to believe there are only 18 people, I deny that too. Even though I want there to be more than just the 18 people, I can't accept the existence of the 19th person. In short, even though there are more than 18 people, there are less than 19 people. The number of people in this mansion is 19 greater x... What? Okay, whatever. So the number of people can't be represented by an integer. However, it's impossible for there to be anything after the decimal point. You shouldn't be able to show the number of people without anything but an integer. And yet, 19 is greater than x is greater than 18. How do you explain that fraction less than 1? It's no wonder that 19th person was something that couldn't be seen. That's why, since you can only write the numbers as an integer, you couldn't see that person. The witch cannot be seen, because Beatrice has no body. Therefore, she is invisible. Is there a 19th person or not? Does the witch exist or not? 19 greater than x greater than 18. The witch exists somewhere in that x. His algebra is a bit strange, but... Okay, so now it's 7. The uncomfortable atmosphere continued even after those two left. It was thick with the idea that simply talking about the culprit's identity would be the same thing as deciding who is the suspect. Or whom to suspect. It had begun to feel like the discussion was the case was itself taboo. So no one mentioned the case, or at least out loud. However, those thoughts were filled our minds. All that we couldn't say out loud made our heads feel like they were going to explode. So at least on the outside, the parlor had once again regained its calm mood. Everything was left unsettled.
少しだけ雨足が弱まった気がするね。
まだいっぱい降ってるよ。
仮にやんだって、この島には船がねえんだしな。船が明日すぐに来てくれりゃいいんだがよ。洋館バカンさんもうお腹いっぱいだぜ。
母さん、明日船はいつ来るのかな。
本来なら帰りの船は今日の3時に来てくれることになっていました。先方も台風が過ぎてから来直すと電話をしてくれたでしょうが、あいにく電話は普通ですから。でも向こうも子供の使いではありません。客人の方々の送迎目的だと教えてありますから、おそらく明日の朝一番で、多分9時頃くらいに来てくれるでしょう。
Yeah, I doubt it. It was completely black outside. When I looked at the clock, I realized that it was just past 7. I was starting to get hungry. In the kitchen, Kumasawa was cooking enthusiastically. She had laid out a variety of dishes, and while they didn't match the level of Goda's artful cooking, they were still quite gorgeous. It was an act of kindness from Kumasawa, who was trying to enliven everyone's low spirits with food. Kumasawa wasn't nearly as talented as a professional cook like Goda, but she was far from unskilled. On the contrary, since she had been brought up in a fishing village, the simple food she created was sometimes highly praised. Kanon arranged the food Kumasawa had finished creating on the dishes under her direction. Kanon also helped the kitchen sometimes, but since he was rarely placed at that role, he was slightly awkward, even though he tried his best. Self-conscious about the fact that he couldn't cleverly arrange the food, Kanon's expression darkened slightly, but Kumasawa smiled as though everything was fine.
きれいに盛り付けられてますよ。カノン君もお上手ですよ。
シャノン姉さんだったら、もっときれいに。
Kanon stopped arranging the food for a bit and hung his head. Shannon was the one who always assisted Kumasawa in her cooking. Tonight, Kanon was doing it instead. And as he remembered Shannon's face in the brutal end, he grimaced.
今は忘れなさい。
Genji spoke kindly to Kanon as he advanced upon. Nanjo had escaped from the parlor once his mood had grown sour, and Genji had become his opponent in a game of chess upon Nanjo's request.
はい。今は忘れます。
Yeah, probably not.
それがいいだろう。
Genji purposely refrained from facing Kanon as he spoke. He did so because he understood that it might make things tougher on Kanon if he noticed that someone was looking at his eyes. Nanjo also understood that and held back any thoughtless words.
金蔵さんもどこへ行かれたんでしょうな。ご無事だといいのですが。わかりません。ただ、すべては親方様が望まれ、仕組まれたことのように思っています。
He's probably hanging out with his gold.
それを邪推することは、親方様にお仕えする家具には過ぎたことです。源氏さんは怖くないのですか？私には今夜まだ何か良くないことが起こるような気がして怖いのです。怖いことなど何も。私はただ後ろ宮家にお仕えするだけですので。
Unless he's been hooking up with the old lady maid, Nanjo sighed through his nose and made carefully considered a move. Nanjo was very slightly dubious. That's weird wording. Could Genshi possibly be thinking that he'd be left out of this? He couldn't even imagine what was happening inside this mansion. but he definitely couldn't deny the possibility that Kinzo had devised something. If you liken this island to chess, Kinzo had opened the game, and as a result, 6 pieces had been defeated. Could it be that Genji was calm because he believed that he alone was on the outside of the chessboard and therefore safe? Nanja thought about it. Isn't everyone just a piece on this chessboard, lined up equally without exceptions? Wasn't even Genji, who gained more of Kinzo's trust than anyone? No, who was confident in his position as Kinzo's only close friend? Just another piece, just one of the pieces laid out on the chessboard?
Genji-san, 私は今夜が本当に怖いのです。無事に明日の朝を迎えられることを心より願っています。
Probably not. No, I think it's going to be Ava and Hideyoshi. Here we go. The guest room Ava and Hideyoshi had moved into had originally been built to a guest house before the guest house construction. So until a few years ago, they had stayed in these rooms every family conference and were very familiar with them. This room was just a room at a hotel with a bedroom and a bathroom. So even though they were still shut in, it was far more comfortable than the parlor.
やっぱり家族だけだとリラックスできるな。他のみんなも客室にこもって鍵をかけてりゃええんや。
夏日姉さんが客間を出るなって威張り散らしてるんだもん。誰も口答えなんてできないでしょ。あの人、ずーっと冷や飯を食ってきたから、兄さんが死んでやっと天下が来たって張り切ってんのよ。
I don't look at it that way.
まったく、ずうずうしいったらあるしな。
Of all people.
まあ、そう言うな。夏日さんもあれで結構頑張っとるんやで。お前もそう突っかからんでもええやないか。さっきのレシートの件も、あそこまでは言い過ぎやで。
だってん。あそこで言わなかったら、もう言うタイミングがないんだもん。
Ava, sulking cutely and looking at the television, sat along Hideyoshi, who was lying on the bed.
でも、こうして二人きりになるのはずいぶん久しぶりよね。
そうやな。思えば、わしもお前も老けたもんや。ジョージが生まれてから何もかもがあっという間や。
本当にあっという間よ。子供を作るの焦りすぎたかしら。
Ava's eyes looked like they were staring off into the distance. Yes, she had thought of it as a once-in-a-lifetime chance. Her older brother Kraus had been unable to father a child for quite some time. 6 years passed after his marriage to Natsui without any signs of pregnancy, which did not please Kinzo at all. Ava herself had thought that, since her name would be moved outside the Ushiromiya family register when she got married anyway, it didn't matter whether a successor to the headship was born or not. And then one day, she had a heavenly revelation. Or maybe it was the whisperings of the devil that she had listened to in her greed. If she could give birth to a successor first, wouldn't she be able to remain in the Ushiromiya register? If things went well, might she have a chance to inherit the Ushiromiya family herself? When she proposed this to Hideyoshi, he had approved of it instantly. This wasn't because Hideyoshi also had greedy thoughts. For Hideyoshi, who had no close relatives, it was a chance for him to feel once more the long-forgotten thing called family. So when they got married, he hadn't fussed over which last name they were going to keep, and had quickly agreed to have his name entered into the Ushiromiya family register. It hadn't been easy to persuade Kinzo, but as his daughter Ava knew Kinzo's personality well, so by choosing the time when Kinzo was most dissatisfied with Natsui, she was magnificently able to make him accept Hideyoshi as an adopted son-in-law. Looking at Hideyoshi, who had achieved success after starting from nothing, Kinzo might have seen a little bit of himself. He quickly grew to like Hideyoshi, and approved his transfer into the Ushiromiya register. This is an interesting thing that doesn't really exist in America. George would have eventually become the successor to the Ushiromiya family. They had raised him strictly with that purpose in mind. They had been worth their while and grown into a fabulous young man who wouldn't disappoint no matter where he went. That was why he had not been permitted to fall in love with a servant like Shannon. So when she learned that Shannon was dead and the engagement was now invalid, though part of her had still been shocked by the gruesome crime, part of her had been relieved that her dear George wouldn't be stolen by some servant girl. Of course she feels that way.
私、クラウス兄さんのことが昔から嫌いだったわ。偉そうで威張ってて。自分がやがては当主になるのだと自慢してて。だから、それに一矢報いてやりたかった。でも、それは子供の頃の感情なのよ。でもその感情は、結局、自分の人生のほとんどを支配した。それだけならまだいい。その感情は、あなたやジョージまで巻き込んで振り回してしまった。
エヴァ、備え自分を責めるな。
Hideyoshi got up and held Ava's shoulder. She could feel a warm understanding from him.
わしはな、自分の人生はもうとっくに折り返しに入っとる。でもな、今日までの生活を後悔したことは一度もないで。一度もや。エヴァと一緒で他の男どもじゃ味わえん楽しい人生になったと思っとる。戦争で身寄りを失ったわしにもう一度家族のぬくもりを教えてくれた。だから後宮の家には感謝しとるし、わしの唯一の家だと思っとる。わしとお前が歩んできた人生にな、今日までほんまに楽しい人生やったで。
These two are getting ripped apart for sure.
ありがとう、あなた。
Ava hung her head, burying her face in Hideyoshi's chest. Probably no one in the parlor could even imagine that this side of Ava
感謝
existed.
するのはわしや。
Give me some sugar, baby.
今日までお前と一緒にいて後悔した日なんてあらへん。
私もよ。あなたと一緒になれてよかった。
ジョージももう立派な大人や。わしが見張ってなくてもしっかり仕事ができる一人前や。で、正月あたりをのんびりモルジブあたりで過ごさんか。わしら二人水いらずや。
いやよ。毎年年賀状の返礼で寝る暇もないとか言ってるじゃない。
次の正月だけはなしや。年賀状は見ん。黙って下のお年玉くじだけチェックするんや。今年はカラーテレビくらい当てたいで。
やだ。モルジブでお年玉くじのチェックなんてしたくない。
じゃあそいつもなしや。水いらずのんびりでジョージが生まれる直前の新婚時代の続きをちょいとしてみんか。
それならいいわね。
モルジブはええとこらしいで。なんもない島に美しいサンゴ礁と水上コテージが並んでてな。
新婚時代の続きっていつからなの？
仕事納めしたらすぐや。旅行店に聞いてみんとわからんが、多分大晦日前には。
いや。
How about now?
今。すぐがいい。
Ava nagged at his lips in a peevish yet flirtatious manner. The only sounds that filled the room were a distant voice of the announcer on the news, which Hideyoshi had left on, and the obnoxious pounding of the rain against the window. There was a knock at the door, and Genji-san entered.
奥様、お夕食の準備が整いました。お食事はまたこちらでよろしいですか？
ええ。ここへ運ばせなさい。南條先生はまだ厨房にいるのですか？
はい。次の一手を熟考したいとおっしゃっております。ご安心を。他の使用人たちとご一緒です。
源氏さんはじい様の相手ができるくらいチェスが強いもんな。南條先生よりも強いらしいぜ。
そうなんだ。昔相手をしてもらったことがあるけど、あれは勝たせてくれたのかな。
マリア、もうすぐ飯だそうだぜ。しかし、よく一日中テレビを見ていて飽きねえな。
いつもテレビいっぱい見てるから平気。
マリアちゃんはテレビっ子なんだね。
食事だから机の上を片付けないとダメだぜ。
Earlier, we had torn several pages out of Maria's notebook, and there was now a mess where everyone had been drawing together. Jessica began clearing that up quickly. Still, everyone here can really draw. I'd never have guessed.
源氏、エヴァさんたちにも、せめて食事くらい一緒にしないかとお声をかけなさい。どうせ断るでしょうが。
かしこまりました。
お父様の次はエヴァさんですか。つくづく、後ろ宮家の食卓には全員が揃いませんね。
Natsui felt her headache start throbbing again, and she lightly held her temples. The distance from the kitchen parlor wasn't that great, so Genji had gone and come back by himself, but the guest room was a little further away. Natsui had warned him to avoid being alone whenever possible, and just now Nanjo had also admonished him, saying it would be better if he held a little more concern for his safety. Kanon accompanied Genji, and the two of them went to visit Ava and Hideyoshi in their guest room. Something bad's gonna happen. Genji knocked on the door.
エヴァ様、秀吉様、お夕食の準備が整いました。
He waited a short while for them to come out, but there was no response.
源氏様、これは。
Blood on the door? Kanon pointed under the door. A Western envelope had been inserted under it. Normally, when something like this was inserted this way, it had been interpreted as a message from someone outside to someone in the room. So since this might be a private note meant for Ava and Hideyoshi, it was not something Kanon and Genji were supposed to take interest in. But this Western envelope was one of Kinzo's same kind as the one that Maria had taken out last night and surprised everyone with.
間違いない。親方様の封筒だ。
あるいは。
Even though this is one of Kinzo's evidence, the letter that Maria read aloud from the previous night hadn't come from Kinzo. Genji continued knocking a little harder and called out in a loud voice.
エヴァ様、エヴァ様、源氏でございます。いらっしゃいますか。お返事をお願いいたします。エヴァ様。
Dude, they're trying to have sex. But there's no response. That'd be funny if they still were. Sometimes when servants went to call some guest for a meal, the guest would be sleeping so deeply that they wouldn't wake up. In times like these, the guest would stick a letter in the door to show that it was time to come out and leave the guest be. But despite that, Kenshi beat even harder on the door and called out Ava's name. However, there was no answer. Kanon stuck his ear up to the door, held his breath, listening for any sounds coming from inside.
テレビの音らしきものが。
I hear something that sounds... Oh, sorry.
でも気配が感じられません。お部屋は空っぽかも。
Genji took out a handkerchief and, careful not to touch it with his bare hands, gently pulled out the envelope that had been stuck under the door. it was sealed with a deep red sealing wax. Without a doubt, the mark that the sealing wax had come from the Ushiromi head's ring.
エヴァ様、エヴァ様、どうかお返事を。もうお部屋にはいらっしゃいませんか。
But there was still no answer. There was a chance that those two were aimlessly walking around the mansion. This was the home Ava had grown up in. There was plenty of reason to think that she had gone on a casual stroll. Yeah, right. Genji groped around his pocket and pulled out a bundle of keys which contained a key that would open the guest room. Kanon also understood what this meant. They would sometimes unlock the door so they could go in and do things like make beds, but only when they made sure the guests were out. To unlock the door for any other reason, and especially to do so when there was a chance that the guests had not given permission, it might still be in there, was an action unbecoming of a servant. Well, you don't have a choice, dude. But Genji had decided if only the problem had been his knock hadn't received a reply, he wouldn't go this far. Okay. I'm gonna guess they might see Hideyoshi having sex with Beatrice. She might have turned, I don't know. This is just a guess. But the envelope under the door was doubtlessly of Kingzo's. Or rather, one of the western envelopes of the Ushiromi family had. After last night, the sender of this envelope could be someone other than Kingzo. If this letter had been sent by someone else, or they're dead in there. After giving that final notice, Genji stuck one of the keys from the bundle into the keyhole. There was a sound of the door unlocking. And after slowly turning the knob, he slowly started opening the door. Light seeped through the crack of the door. Were they in the room? Or had they forgotten to turn out the lights? It was the sound of the door chain being pulled tight. The chain had been secured. The chain couldn't be secured from the outside, so it also proved that they were in the room. The sound of voices from the TV seeped out of the room. The lights, the chain, and the TV. All these things made it clear they were in the room, but there was no sign of them. Genji called to Ava once again through the crack of the door, but there was no answer.
Genji-sama, いかがしますか?
You're gonna need to get some wire cutters, dude. Or some big cutters. As part of their jobs, the servants were able to unlock almost any door in the mansion, but they had no way to open a door with a chain. The only way to get by the chain was to cut it. That was certainly not permitted as part of a servant's usual work. A creepy chill had already rushed up their backs. Kanon held his breath again and tried to sense someone through the door, but even so he wasn't able to sense anyone.
私は奥様をお呼びしてくる。カノンはチェーンの切断を。
はい。
As Kanon hurried away to get a cutting tool, Genji called him to stop.
待てカノン。厨房に戻り、熊沢と行動するように。断じて一人で行動してはならんぞ。
Fair.
はい。かしこまりました。
It looked like Kanon was wondering why he had to do something so troublesome in the middle of this urgent situation, but Genji had said it out of weariness. He didn't care what happened to himself, but in the worst case scenario, he didn't want anything to happen to Kanon. In the kitchen, Kumasawa was piling food on the serving cart, and Nanjo was waiting for Genji, apparently wanting to show him a move he'd finally thought up of that made me turn the tables on him. But Genji's appearance immediately told him that something was wrong.
おや、どうしましたか、源氏さん。南條先生、申し訳ありませんが、この勝負は一度中断させてください。カノンはチェーンを頼む。熊沢、食事の配膳は一時中断し、カノンと同行するように。私は奥様のところへ行く。南條先生もご一緒に。何かあったんですかな？
Yes. Genji took Nanjo, who still didn't know what was going on, and quickly left the kitchen.
熊沢さん、
申し訳ありませんが、僕と一緒に来てください。
何があったんですか、カノンさん。
Kumasawa said exactly the same thing as Nanzhao, unable to take in the situation, and chased after Cannon, who had flown out into the hallway. Taking Kumasawa's son, Cannon went to the storage room and looked through the tools packed in the toolboxes hanging over the walls, trying to find something that could be used to cut the chain.
何を探してるんですか？私も手伝いますよ。
ドアチェーンを切断するんです。大きめの番線カッターはどこだっけ？
ドアチェーンを？どうしてそんなことをするんですか？
Dude,
エ
just
ヴァ様たちのお部屋にチェーンが。中にいらっしゃるはずなのに、お声をかけても返事がないんです。
It took Kumasawa some time figuring out how the cutting chain and Eva and Hideyoshi not answering were connected, but she did realize that this was an urgent situation.
これなら多分。
Cannon took a very large wire cutter that had been hanging on the wall. It was called a cutter, but maybe it'd be easier to understand if we said it was shaped like a large pair of pliers. Cannon remembered once being warned that this is a dangerous tool that could easily cut through one of your fingers. Cannon took that and rushed up the stairs. That's like running with scissors. He already knew instinctively he should fight for every minute, every second to open it quickly. Or perhaps it was already...
待ってください、カノンさん。
早く！
Yeah, you got the old battle axe with you, man. Kumasawa eventually caught up with him, gasping for breath, with both her hands on her knees. While Cannon changed his grip on the wire cutters and looked up at the door, he let out a struck speechless. What the...
なんですかこれは。
Kumasawa screamed weakly, her face pallid. There was no surprise, because right there on the door, just like the magic circle that had been drawn on the shutter of the Rose Garden storehouse, there was another eerie shape drawn with blood-like paint. However, it would be odd to call this one a magic circle, because unlike what most people would expect, it wasn't a circle with shapes drawn in it, but it was a more slightly complicated geometric shape. However, those strange characters filling in the gaps, which weren't from the alphabet, were the same ones used on the magic circle on the shutter. But the thing that had Cannon struck speechless wasn't the eerie thing that wasn't how eerie the magic circle was. It was that something like this hadn't been there a short while ago. First, he had taken a trip back to the kitchen. After that, he had gone to the storage room to grab the tool and headed right back. Put those together and it couldn't have been more than 5 minutes. How could someone add something this creepy during that period of time? And as though it had just been drawn, almost like the door itself was bleeding, several unsettling vertical red lines slowly dripped down, getting longer and longer. Kumasawa's knees gave way and she sank down on the spot. If Kumasawa hadn't done this first, then Cannon surely would have wanted to.
ベアトリーチェ。
ベアトリーチェ様の仕業ですよ。恐ろしや恐ろしや。
See, I say they should have just kicked open the door. I'm pretty sure it could have broken that chain. Cannon gulped, then readied the wire cutter and approached the door. He didn't want to get close to this disturbing magic circle, and he really didn't want to touch the steadily dripping substance that looked like blood. But if he didn't get close, he wouldn't be able to cut the chain. Fighting this cold feeling, he gulped again, and after gathering his courage, he went even closer, pulling the wire cutter against the chain. He then pressed with all his strength, managing to cut through the chain far more easily than he anticipated. The chain fell into 2 separate parts, which continued to clang as it swayed back and forth.
カノンさん、足元に封筒が。しかもこれは、親方様のもの。
It looked like Kumasawa had also noticed a Western envelope at the bottom of the door, and the sealing wax that had been sealed with the head's ring. Cannon hesitated for a second, whether he should open the letter first or check inside the room, but he eventually decided to fulfill his original purpose. Cannon pulled a handkerchief out of his pocket so that he wouldn't leave fingerprints on the door. If his worst fears were realized, the police would want to investigate this room too. He slowly pushed open the door. He was able to more clearly hear the sound of the television, which had been sweeping out faintly this whole time.
Eva-sama.
Ava was lying face up on the bed with her shoes still on. Kumasawa, who had fearfully entered after Cannon, who was hiding behind his back, screamed a short E, which he saw Ava like that. Ava's shoes had been the first part of her that Cannon had seen, so the oddness of wearing shoes in bed was the first thing to strike him. But when Ava's head had shifted into his line of sight, Cannon couldn't help but let out a short scream like Kumasawa. Right in the middle of Ava's forehead, something had been placed. Something was growing there. No. Right in the center of her forehead? Was it an old-fashioned knife? That or some weapon like it sticking out? Ugh. At the base where it was stuck in, blood dripped down, staining the sheets on the other side bright red. Kumasawa's knees gave way once more, and she sank down on the floor. Her mouth kept flapping open and closed, but she couldn't even scream. Ava was dead, with some kind of weapon sticking out of her forehead. Both eyes were open wide, and the image of the person who killed her must have been burned into them. But then the only mouth capable of naming that person had been shut for all eternity. Even though her forehead was the last place they wanted to look, they couldn't tear their eyes from it. Right there, the weapon was stuck into Ava's forehead, standing almost perfectly upright. And on the other hand was a complicated design that you wouldn't expect to see on an ordinary weapon. That thing could be summed up with the word occult. It was a vulgar object with a design that might have been of some demon.
Hideyoshi-sama.
Ava was on top of her bed, but the other bed was empty. Where was Hideyoshi? After taking a backwards glance at Kumasawa, still on her knees and stupefied, she checked the bathroom just in case. At the moment she opened the door, she was greeted by steam and the sound of a shower. The bathroom was the same familiar style of hotel bathrooms. When taking a shower, the waterproof curtain was used to keep water from flying out. The waterproof curtain was half open, and lying tumbled on the bathtub was Hideyoshi, completely naked with both eyes open, and pointing right at Cannon. Just like Ava, a weapon with a demon-like design was stuck into his forehead. Since his head had been under the shower's hot water the whole time, his face wasn't half covered and filthy with blood like Ava's had been. But the sight of him dead while taking a shower was tragic enough. Just then, they heard Natsui's voice coming from the hall. She was probably coming with Genji.
またしてもこのような落書きが。この手紙は中には何と？
いえ、まだ読んでおりません。うかつに触らん方がいいですが、犯人の指紋が残っとるかもしれん。警察に渡した方がいい。
わざわざ手紙を残すくらいです。どうせ指紋など残っていません。
It's true. As Natsui said that, she picked up the envelope. And before checking its contents, she entered the room herself, where she found Ava dead.
エヴァさん。
奥様。こちらには秀吉様も。
これはむごいですな。
カノン、シャワーを止めてあげなさい。気の毒にも程があります。
Oof.
はい。
Cannon gripped his handkerchief and twisted the valve, turning off the shower. In the bathtub, a small jar of body soap had fallen with its cap off. It really looked like he had been attacked while taking a shower. There was still a small splash of blood clinging to the white bathtub, and the combination of red and white made a horrible contrast.
南條先生。わかった。死斑は出とらんな。死後硬直も始まっとらん。おそらく殺されてから1時間経ったかどうかというところだろう。しかしこのような柄の短い凶器で頭蓋骨を考えられん。
Nuncho checked their pulse and their pupils, making certain of their deaths once more. As Cannon watched this businesslike treatment, he thought, couldn't you tell at a glance that they're dead without doing all that? Nuncho thought about removing the weapon, but then decided it better to preserve the scene and hand it over to the police, so he left it alone. But at close inspection of the base, it showed that it didn't have a blade. In fact, it was more canonical than blade-shaped. He noticed that rather than a knife, it was more like a short-handed spear, something with a shape better suited for thrusting than slicing. Rather than a short spear, you could call it a thick ice pick. At any rate, after looking at the scene, no further words were needed to describe what sort of terrible purpose such an eerily designed weapons were originally made for, nor was it necessary to explain how they carried out their function. Natsui, hoping to escape the repulsive steam filling the bathroom as soon as she could, covered her mouth with a handkerchief and dashed out from the room. Just viewing her gruesome bodies for an instant had been enough to burn the image into her eyes. If she looked any longer, that image would surely remain in her vision for all eternity. The rising urge of vomit was exactly the same feeling she had that morning at the gruesome gardening storehouse. For a while, Natsui couldn't help but stand with her back facing the guest room, fighting that sickness in her stomach.
とにかくこの部屋を子供たちにジョージ君にするわけにはいきません。至急この部屋を閉じなさい。
見せられませんとも。両親のこんなむごい姿をとてもジョージさんには。
But they could tell those fiercely racing footsteps in the hallway belonged to George, even before he came dashing into the room. George and the other children had been waiting in the parlor. However, when they saw Genji sweep to Natsui, and when they saw her turn pale and fly out the parlor, they felt a sense of foreboding. And when they saw a large group of people gathered around the guest room, they were sure that...
なんだよこれまた魔法陣かよ。
エヴァおばさんたちは無事なんだよな。おいカノン君、これは何の騒ぎなんだ。
They're dead, yo.
バトラ様。
Cannon didn't have to say anything. George's scream after he ran into the room and told them everything they needed to know.
誰がこんなことを。殺してやる。殺してやる。
ジョージ君、しっかり。
Natsui touched George's shoulder with her other hand, but he violently shook her off. George fell over beside Ava and buried his face in the bed in front of his mother's face, wailing. Then he pounded on the bed with his fist over and over again.
ジョージ兄さん、しっかり。バトラ様。
Battler had his back against the wall of the hallway and was covering his eyes with his right hand, weeping without restraint.
ひでえぜ。心に決めた女を婚約した次の日に失った。同じ日に親父とおふくろまで殺されるなんてよ。そんなのあんまりにもむごいじゃねえか。
It's so bad for him. Of course it's sad when anyone dies, no matter who it is. But to Battler, those left alone by the deaths of others were far more worthy of pity. Everyone here now had lost someone close to them. George wasn't the only one to be pitied. However, George's pain was far greater than anyone else's. Yes.
そりゃよ、人はいつか死ぬぜ。人間、誰だっていつか死別の悲しみと戦わなきゃならねえ日が来るだろうよ。でもよ、そいつは兄貴にとってはずっと未来の話で、しかもそいつは一つずつ順番に訪れるべきもんじゃねえかよ。無謀すぎるぜ。やろうやろう。少しは人の情けってもんがねえのかよ。
おう、バトラ、泣かない泣かない。
Maria tried to comfort Battler in a mechanical sounding voice. Battler violently wiped his tears.
ああ、くそ。もう流さねえぜ。悔し涙も悲しみの涙ももう二度と流さねえぜ。ああ、全然ダメだ。俺たちは魔女様に爪を食らってるわけだ。主勢一方ってわけだ。そりゃダメだぜ。全然ダメだ。チェス盤がひっくり返っちまうぜ。野郎は俺たち羊が明日まで逃げる手段もなく怯えてるだけだろうと思ってるだろうよ。だからひっくり返すぜ。明日までこの島から逃げられねえのは野郎も同じだ。しょんべんちびりそうになりながら逃げ隠れするのは俺たちじゃねえ。暴いてやるぜ。必ずな。明日までに。いや、明日なんか待たねえ。今夜中にその胸ぐらを掴み上げてやる。
Good luck.
とにかくこの部屋は警察が来るまでこのままにして施錠します。いいですね。
Natsui announced it as though she didn't care whether they agreed or not. If anyone had a right to object, it would have been George, but he looked as though he'd shed enough tears. George nodded slightly, still facing away from the others, and when he stood up, everyone else agreed too. Natsui still hadn't opened that western envelope of the family hedge that she'd picked up. But now that they decided to leave the room, she decided to unseal it in the parlor where everyone could watch. As soon as they walked out in the hallway to head back up to the parlor, some of them immediately felt something out of place, or maybe sensed something strange.
答えよ。
マリアもわかるか。こりゃ何の匂いだよ。ひでえ匂いだぜ。
Dang, can these people get a freaking break? When everyone sniffed the air, they did notice a horrible burnt smell drifting through the hallway, one that none of them had smelled until then.
私、ちょっと厨房を見てきます。火はちゃんと消したはずなんですよ。
I don't think so. After noticing a burnt smell, it was natural that Kumasawa, who had been using the burner in the kitchen, suspected it was her own slip-up that caused it. Kumasawa hastily dashed away. Yeah, no one goes by themselves, even though two people died in the same room, but... After nodding at Genji's order, Kanon followed after her. He wasn't running, but as he followed her, he tried to search for the cause of the smell in other directions as well.
臭い。
これは確かに 鼻が曲がりそうな匂いですね。
It's probably burning
しか
flesh,
し
I'm guessing.
換気のために窓を開けてもいいものか。
Natsui was reluctant to open windows in the situation where self-defense was so important.
換気扇を回させましょう。
Yeah,
窓
that'll...
を開ける必要はないと思います。
Okay.
上司の兄貴、話しかけても大丈夫かよ。
犯人を探す相談なら構わないよ。
It seemed that George had managed to climb out of his abyss of sorrow. All that filled his chest out was a quiet flame of hatred towards the culprit who had stolen the lives of the one he loved and his beloved parents.
部屋にはチェーンがかかってた。さっき構造を見たが、とても外から細工できる代物じゃねえ。つまり、完璧な密室だったってことだ。
そうなるね。バラ庭園の倉庫の時は、シャッターの鍵を使用人室からこっそりと持ち出したのだろうとか、あるいは、複製の鍵を持っていた可能性とか、いくつか方法が想像できた。でも、チェーンは違う。チェーンは一般に浸透した施錠方法の中で、最もシンプルに密室を構築できる。
チェーンだけは物理的に破壊しない限り外からはどうにもならないぜ。じゃあつまり犯人は扉からは出入りしなかったってことなのか。
こりゃ面白いや。つい数時間ほど前にも扉以外でどうやって部屋から出入りしたのかってみんなで騒いだ気がするぜ。
So, I wonder if there's like tunnels or all these secret passageways. Or she's just a witch and can go through locks, but... Back then, we were all losing our cool, wondering how grandfather had disappeared from his room. The receipt Aunt Ava stuck at the door on a whim proved that the door remained sealed. And since Aunt Natsui was the only person to enter or exit during that time, she was under suspicion. Aunt Ava proposed a theory how Aunt Natsui might have thrown grandfather out of the window and left by the door herself. But this door is much simpler. It was sealed from the inside by the door chain. The window had been locked from the inside, and the bodies had been inside the room. This time, it had really been, without exaggeration, a truly closed room. That's right. If you include grandfather's disappearance, 3 cases have occurred, and all 3 times, the door has been the point of interest. The first was a shutter. There was a key in the servant room, and if we assume that someone knew about that, this can't really be called a closed room. The next was a door sealed by the receipt. However, Aunt Natsui entered the room, so if grandfather had left through the window and been thrown out, she would have been able to lock the door of the window before escaping. Or, like my theory, grandfather could have hidden until the receipt was gone and left the room later. Basically, this door can be defeated with a handful of desperate tricks. In that sense, you can't really call this one a closed room either. And now we have the door sealed with a door chain. Finally, we have to give up. The window, the door, everything had been locked. It was a perfect closed room. At first, the first hadn't been closed room because everyone could be suspected. The second had been a closed room because Aunt Natsui could be suspected. But this time, no one can be suspected. This was a perfect closed room because the door chain formed a seal that blocked everyone equally well.
なら、犯人は室内に入らずに犯行に及んだ。
Yeah, how the hell do you do that, dude?
部屋の外から何らかの方法で。
確かに。チェーンである以上、人が通れるほどは開けなくても、多少の隙間を開けることができる。ノックして、顔を覗かせたところを襲うとか。
No.
いや、甘いか。
甘いよな。エヴァおばさんの遺体が扉のすぐそばだったなら、それも考えたぜ。だが、エヴァおばさんは部屋の奥のベッドの上。しかも、秀吉おじさんはバスルームだった。チェーンの隙間からでは、姿を見ることもできねえし、手を伸ばすことも。ちくしょう。 全然ダメだぜ。さっぱりだ。
Something was tugging softly at my sleeve. It was Maria.
おう、満足？
Oh my gosh.
満足って何がだよ。
バトラは親族の誰かを疑うのが嫌だから、犯人はベアトリーチェであってほしいと願ったよ。だからベアトリーチェは叶えた。バトラが言った通り、絶対に人間には無理なことをして、バトラになのにわがまま。
Did he smack her? I tapped Maria, who was laughing unpleasantly on the head with my fist.
ああ、叶えてくれてありがとうよ。今のはその礼と、不謹慎な時に笑ったことへの教育的指導だ。それより教えやがれ。エヴァおばさんたちの部屋の扉にも、また怪しげな落書きがされていた。あれもまた魔法陣なのか。
あれは特に覚えやすい特徴的な形なんだから、あのくらい知っててほしいね。あいて
知らねえから花を持たせてやってんだ。ごちゃごちゃ言わねえで解説しろい。
バトラは暴力的だね。あんまり意地悪すると教えないよ。あいて言うよ、このげんこつ男。あれは、月の一の魔法陣だよ。
何の意味がある？その魔法陣のご利益は？書かれてるヘブライ語の意味は？
記されているのは、旧約聖書、詩編第107編の16節。主は聖堂の扉を破り、鉄の栓抜きを打ち破ってくださいました。魔法陣の効用は2つ。1つは、いかなる方法によって閉ざされた扉でも開くことができる。
そりゃ便利な魔法だぜ。つまり、魔法の力に頼らなきゃ開けぬ密室の扉っていう。もう一つの効用は、
開かぬ扉を八方塞がりの事態に見立て、扉を開く。難解な事態の時に用いることで、それまで思いつきもしなかった解決策を与えてくれるんだよ。平たく言うと、観察力や洞察力、ひらめきや直感を授けてくれるんだね。
は
あ、ベアトリーチェはバトラごとき人間風情にこの扉の開き方がわかるものかって挑発してるんだよ。
She gonna get hit again?
よーし、もう黙れご苦労。上等だぜ。
マリアちゃん。この世に魔女も悪魔も存在しない。父さんと母さんは誰かが殺した。それが僕のよく知る人間なのか、知らない人間なのかはわからない。でも、そのどちらであっても、必ず人間なんだ。
しかし、どうやって、せいぜい10センチ程度しか開かない扉の隙間から、どうやったら室内の2人を。
Yeah, dude.
それにしても耐え難い匂いです。一体何事なのですか？
They can hear a scream now? Ken and Kumasawa had gone ahead, realized the smell wasn't coming from the kitchen even before they arrived there. That was because they noticed an even thicker stench rising from the stairs leading to the basement, which they had passed on their way to the kitchen. Oh yeah, they'd never been to the basement.
ボイラー室。
Oh no.
またボイラーの調子が悪いんでしょうか。
Is anyone missing other than the grandfather? Those stairs led to the underground boiler room. The mansion's boiler was old and in poor condition. Both of them had witnessed problems with the boiler on several occasions, but they had never smelled the boiler belching out a stench like this before. Slam.
今の音は
The thing they heard from the basement was definitely the sound of a door closing. Kumasawa had phrased it as a question, but she already knew it couldn't be anything else. Kumasawa was so surprised that the sound that her knees had given away again, and she cowered. After all, that very moment, no one could be in the boiler room. Just a few seconds ago, everyone had been crowded together around Ava and Hideyoshi's room. So who caused the sound of the door closing just now?
カノンさん
After taking a short second to sort out the situation, Cannon ran towards the basement. Since they heard the sound of a door closing just now, there was no sign of anyone coming up the stairs. The person who had closed the door had to be inside the boiler room now. If the boiler room had been a dead end, Cannon wouldn't have rushed so hastily. But Cannon was a servant, so he knew. There were two entrances to the boiler room, and one open to the mansion and one open to the courtyard. If he didn't chase them now, they might slip away. Bro, you're about to die. Kumasawa reached the same conclusion long after Cannon did, but she couldn't let him go alone. If the thing in the boiler room was a culprit, an opponent who easily killed 6 adults in the first murder, then no matter how Cannon confronted them, he would be no match. Of course, with this argument, even if Kumasawa joined him, it wouldn't change anything. At any rate, after a delay, Kumasawa decided that she mustn't let Cannon go alone, and she rushed down the stairs. At that time, Cannon was already in the boiler room. The boiler room's characteristically damp heat tormented him. It had always been an unpleasant, smelly, and hot place. And on top of that, the room was so full of a horrible stench which made Cannon feel like he was going to be sick. There was no doubt that this room was the source. In that case, Cannon should have been searching for where the smell was coming from. However, Cannon kept gazing straight forward as he grabbed the hatchet from the tool shelf just off the side of the door. He hadn't stretched out his hand because he wanted the hatchet. He wanted to grab a weapon, any weapon. Why? Cannon gazed into the darkness where the naked light bulb couldn't pierce. Then he answered.
ルーレットは数字と赤黒にかけて配当を競い合う。だが赤か黒かのようなリスクの低い賭けはその程度の配当しか与えられない。
The words coming from Cannon's mouth were swallowed up by the darkness. If the darkness suddenly started to swirl, darkness suddenly started to swirl, glittering. Oh. Beatrice. Oh, wow. It was such a fantastical scene. Golden sparkling butterflies that hid in the shadows all over the boiler room, flapped their wings, twinkling beautifully, and gathered in the darkness, disappearing. Cannon continued speaking, directing his words at the darkness as it swallowed the butterflies up. But as the butterflies gathered in the darkness, they, probably know they would certainly laugh. But Cannon continued to speak without faltering in the slightest.
逆により的中率の低いかけ方をすればそのリスクに比例した配当が与えられる。親方様は天文学的なリスクを的中できることを奇跡とその結果得られる天文学的な配当を魔法と呼んでいた。親方様とお前がどんな魔法を求めてルーレットに挑んでいるのか。しかし、お前は忘れている。ルーレットには赤でも黒でもない目が出うることを忘れている。
Roulette has a special pocket called Zero, which means that the house takes everything in certain variants of the game. This means that all the coins bet on the table will be swept up, just as though everyone has forfeit.
僕は、一つだけ心に決めていた。もし、シャノンが殺されて、僕が生き残るようなことがあったなら、この身を投げ出して、お前のルーレットをすべて台無しにしてやろうと。
こ
れは、親方様が決めたルールでも、このルールは僕が作った。僕は、もう家具じゃない。
Oh, what is he gonna do?
お前のルーレットの、ゼロなんだ。
Cannon's face twisted with humiliation. It was clear that his defiance against his own weakness was being ridiculed somehow. Cannon's brow creased even further, and a fierce expression that he'd never shown to anyone appeared on his face. The hand grasping the hatchet was shaking. His sweat became droplets which slid downward. It was clear that the emotion causing Cannon's hand to shake wasn't just anger. However, Cannon suppressed that emotion.
僕はもう、お前の言葉に惑わされたりはしない。悪魔のルーレットはこれでおしまいだ。地獄にてさらに1000年。次の召喚者を待つがいい。ベアトリーチェ!
Whoa, what is he doing? When Cannon raised the hatchet to try to drive into the darkness definitely sneered. It sneered at the courage as if it were vulgar, lazy, futile, and meaningless. What the hell was... Cannon, his hatchet still held aloft, couldn't take another step after that. With a clang, the hatchet that he'd been grasping fell and rolled on the floor. Following that with a pair of thuds, Cannon's knees hit left, then right. His hand, which looked like it was trying to catch the sky now that the catch had been dropped, gradually lowered, landing on his chest. Then the other hand did the same. Right there, a handle with a demon-shaped design was buried into his chest. The same type of weapon that had been stabbed into Eva and Hideyoshi's foreheads was in Cannon's chest. Dang, I like Cannon. Cannon curled up in anguish, fresh blood dripping from the corner of his mouth. It was makeup too extreme for Cannon's white skin. Around this scene, the glittering gold butterflies danced through their darkness, mesmerizing. It was beautiful, beautiful dance, a funeral march, tribute, ridicule, and contempt for a single boy's self-sacrifice. Cannon had already prepared for his own death. But although he could not do anything but accept the death he had received, he attempted one last measure of resistance. He grasped the handle of a weapon sticking into his chest with both hands, and gritting his teeth with an acute, unearthly pain, he pulled it out. Ooh. For only a moment, bright red spray gushed out. It made for an unpleasant bloop sound. It probably resembled the sound of Cannon's soul as it was sucked into the swamp of the dead.
カノンさん？誰か
Kumasawa screamed at the incomprehensible sight in front of her. Cannon was lying in a pool of blood. Kumasawa's heart was a complete mess. Ah, what a horrible fate. He wouldn't have been killed if I had been with him. Ah, what incredible luck. If I had been with him, I might have been killed too. As she screamed, her expression was filled with complete confusion, and all the muscles in her face were pulled up, almost as though she was smiling while crying. But no one could have made fun of an expression like this.
何事ですか、熊様。返事をしなさい、熊様。
The first one to dash in was Natsui holding the rifle. Battler and Genji dashed in after her. Normally they probably would have started discussing the origin of the violent sedge filling the boiler room, but after they saw Cannon, who was lying on the ground as if he was drowning in an ocean of blood, the stench wasn't important anymore. Natsui realized that even though Cannon was on the verge of death, he was still conscious, so she sent Genji to get the doctor. Natsui, holding the rifle aloft, faced the darkness in the center of the boiling room and shouted, Battler, thinking quick, took a large flashlight from the tool shelf alongside the door and used it to use its light to cut through the darkness Natsui was glaring into. But the light only showed a mechanical-looking piping and door. The door had been left open, a small crack, and it was obvious that someone had left through in a hurry.
Genji, あの扉はどこに通じているのですか?
The courtyard.
中庭です。
逃がすかよ、クソこの野郎!
Battler let a war cry as he slammed into the door. Cool air from outside suddenly rushed in. There were some thin, rough stairs leading up. Battler ran up and shouted, "Yeah, dude, someone just did the same thing, you doof magoo." It's, oh my gosh. Natsui was also rushing up the stairs, chasing after Battler. They were in the courtyard. The courtyard of the mansion had been built strictly for lighting purposes, so it wasn't a very elegant place. But it was surrounded on all sides. The air was calm and completely undisturbed, even though they could hear some strong winds. There was only the gentle, sorrowful rain. As he rushed through the cold and scattered raindrops, dashing up the stairs into the courtyard, Battler looked in every direction. Of course, the odds of him finding his suspicious silhouette just standing around nonchalantly were pretty much zero. Battler spun, looking all around. He turned again and again. He kept spinning until he almost lost his sense of direction. He prayed that he would see the culprit somewhere in the scenery, but there was no chance. All he saw when he spun around was more of the mansion's heartless walls and windows. Furthermore, there were two entrances to the mansion from the courtyard, and neither of them were locked. Because the courtyard couldn't be entered from outside the mansion, and the doors had been built without locks. He didn't know which one they had left through. He had to give up. Battler pounded the walls with his fists. Battler pressed his forehead against the wall, which he had scratched with his fingernails as he cried. Yeah, Cannon's a good dude.
どうして人ってのはな、殺しちまったらな、二度と生き返らねえんだぞ。
I'm not gonna lie, that laugh that Beatrice had when Cannon pulled out the hatchet was creepy as hell.
タケノコみてえにひょいひょい生えてきちゃ来ねえんだぞ。どうして殺すんだよ。どうしてどうして。
So, like, virtually everyone's dying so quickly. I'm assuming there has to be some time loop thing like Higurashi. Right? That's the only thing that makes sense. Battler was a boy who could understand the feelings of pain and regret in a person's heart. So he cried, with all his strength. Natsui had always thought of Battler as a frank person, was a little surprised to find that he had a delicate side. And at the same time, she understood how easily hurt the heart of a young person could be, so she held him.
大丈夫です。あなたも、ジョージ君も、マリアちゃんも、ジェシカも、私が絶対に守ります。
Can everyone accept that it is...
母として、そして、後宮家の代表として。
Battler, after sobbing in Natsui's chest for a while, her chest will definitely sop up some tears. Wiped his tears with a bitter smile as though he had been like that the whole time and tried to appear as though he'd cried more than enough already.
とにかく、一度下に戻りましょう。犯人を探すより、自分たちの身を守る方が最優先です。明日になれば船が来る。そうすれば警察がやってきて、すべてを白日のもとにさらし出してくれるでしょう。犯人がどうあがこうとも、この島から逃げられるもの。
そうっすね。警察さえ来れば。
When the seagulls cry, the crime will be solved. But for some reason, Battler felt a sense of uneasiness, as if the seagulls would never cry again. That couldn't be true. When the typhoon passes, surely the lively seagulls will return to the harbor again. I returned to the boiler room along with Natsui and told everyone weakly that we haven't found anything. We heard Dr. Nanjo say... we heard that Dr. Nanjo and George had carried cannons in the servant room. The servant room had a first aid kit and a sink, and could apparently function as a nurse's office. Kumasawa and Jessica had accompanied them. Stains from Kaneku's blood remained on the floor. Judged by the large amounts of blood loss and the ruthless shape of the weapon that had fallen carelessly to the ground, I figured that Dr. Nanjo's treatment would probably end in vain. The weapon was doubtlessly the same type that had been struck in Ava and at Hideyoshi's foreheads. But wait, isn't the demonic design on the handle a little different? There seemed to be some small differences in that part. Still, as far as our overall shape were concerned, the weapons were of the same type. Though it had seemed brutal, we left the weapons stuck in Aunt Ava and Uncle Hideyoshi's to preserve the crime scene. So this was the first time we were able to have a perfect view of the entire weapon. As we expected, the weapon was not a blade like a knife, but shaped like an ice pick, or rather a thin stake. And it had a spiral-shaped pattern, sort of like a drill. It looked like something that might have been driven in the hearts of human sacrifices in some demonic ritual, including the handle. It was 25 centimeters long. I don't even know. What the hell? How long is that? Half of that was the stake-like part, which was stained with deep red blood. The length of the bloodstained part made it clear just how deeply it might have penetrated into Kaneku's heart. But Natsui and the rest didn't even look at the weapon and instead stood in front of the incinerator where the horrible stench was emanating from. They must have dragged out that thing which had been burning in the furnace. It was still smoldering and sending out dense waves of awfully unpleasant smell. Genji-san and Maria stared down at it. Aunt Natsui probably couldn't stand to look directly at it. She kept shaking her head back to it. Grandpa? I thought nothing could surprise me after everything that had happened, but this? Ugh. I stood there for a while, moaning, with a rising urge to vomit. The true source of the unearthly stench was a scorched corpse that had been cooking inside the incinerator. The clothes, the surface of the body, and the hair were all hideously burned. That grotesque corpse was in a state where not the face, nor the age, nor even the gender could be guessed at. But when I thought about it calmly, I realized that a corpse appearing at this time could only be one person. It was grandfather who disappeared that morning, and whose whereabouts had been unknown.
おそらく親方様だと思います。
私も同感です。このようなお姿でお亡くなりになるとは。おいたわしや。
Alright, I'm gonna stop here, guys. Of all the sessions that I've done, this was by far the most intense. I mean, even though I had feelings that people were gonna die, like the way this is written and everything was, it was still like really creepy and suspenseful, which to me is like impressive. And yeah, I kind of feel like we're gonna have to have a Higurashi thing where there's like a loop, because I mean, how many people are left? Hideyoshi is dead, Ava's dead, grandfather dead, Cannon's dead, Shannon's dead, Jessica's dad, then the other servant. I mean, gosh, over half the people are gone, right? So at least that's what I think. I mean, these people are dropping like flies. I don't see them living for a whole other, even another day. So, yeah, okay, so we got, well, he's dead, but they haven't confirmed it. 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, maybe he's not. He could have put in a body part there. Oh, wow, they have the way that they die on there. This is kind of cool. I guess Cannon isn't dead for sure yet. Okay, well, that's disgusting. Ugh. Okay. But, yeah, that was a disturbing session, and I guess we'll see what happens next.